Questo video è offerto da il Tavolo Italiano. Ciao a tutti e benvenuti al Tavolo Italiano. Today we're going to be studying conjugating regular Italian verbs in the condizionale passato, the past conditional tense. A few footnotes before we start. This lesson assumes you already know how to conjugate verbs in the conditional tense. You'll also know you also need to know how to use them in the passato prossimo. And with all other tenses, there are verbs that are irregular, this time like the passato prossimo, by having irregular past participles. These past participles will have to be committed to memory in order to learn them. A list of more common irregular past participles appear in the vocabulary section of this lesson at iltavoloitaliano.com. And like any aspect of Italian grammar, it takes practice to really gain an understanding of and ability to use what you learn here. So by all means, parli italiano. Pronto? Okay, let's get started. The condizionale passato is most often used like what we would call the past conditional. It's formed much like the passato prossimo by using either the verb essere or avere as auxiliary verbs, but this time conjugated in the conditional tense, followed by the past participle of the verb that you want to use. For example, if you wanted to say, I would have eaten, you would first conjugate avere in the conditional tense, and then follow it with mangiato, the past participle for mangiare. With the subject pronoun included, it would look like this. Io avrei mangiato. I would have eaten. Just as a quick review, we know that regular past participles are easy to form. You simply remove the infinitive ending and apply the past participle ending as shown below. Verbs ending in are use atto. For example, mangiare minus are equals mangi plus atto equals mangiato. For verbs ending in ere, we use utto. For example, credere minus ere leaves cred, plus utto gives us creduto. And finally, for verbs ending in ire, we use itio. For example, finire minus ire equals fin, plus ito equals finito. Now please remember, these are how you handle the regular past participles only. There are a good amount of irregular past participles, and you may need to look up the verb to find out which ones are regular and irregular. To conjugate the regular are verbs in the conditional passato, what we have is a conjugated auxiliary verb, plus the infinitive verb minus the infinitive ending, or the verb stem, plus the past participle ending, equals the conjugated verb. For example, avremo, to have for we. Parlare, to speak, minus are equals par plus atto, the past participle ending. Hence, we have avremo parlato, we would have spoken. Parlare conjugated in the condizionale passato. Io avrei parlato, I would have spoken. Tu avresti parlato, you would have spoken. Lui o lei avrebbe parlato, he or she, it would have spoken. Noi avremmo parlato, we would have spoken. Voi avreste parlato, y'all would have spoken. And loro avrebbero parlato, they would have spoken. As you can see, the past conditional tense is actually quite easy to use, especially if you already know the conditional and the passato prossimo, which is why we mentioned that in our little page where we put the footnotes before we start. Because simply said, all you're doing is you're using avere here in the conditional tense, followed by the past participle, which you probably learned when you studied the passato prossimo. Let's look at ere verbs. Same exact thing. You have the conjugated auxiliary verb, and you take the ere verb and you less the ere, and you add the past participle ending. For example, avremo, to have for we in the condizionale, plus credere, to believe, minus ere equals cred, plus utto, the past participle ending. Hence, we have avremo creduto, we would have believed. So let's look at credere, conjugated in conditional, past conditional, condizionale passato, scusi. Io avrei creduto, I would have believed. Tu avresti creduto, you would have believed. Lui, lei avrebbe creduto, he, she, it would have believed. Noi avremmo creduto, we would have believed. Voi avreste creduto, y'all would have believed. Loro avrebbero creduto, they would have believed. And finally the IRE, which follows the exact same pattern. You have the conjugated auxiliary verb. You take the infinitive verb, make it into a past participle by dropping the infinitive ending, adding the past participle ending. So let's look at sentire. Once again, we have avremo, the conditional for to have, for noi, or we. Sentire minus ire plus ito equals sentito. So hence we have avremo sentito, we would have heard. Sentire conjugated in the condizionale passato. Io avrei sentito, I would have heard. Tu avresti sentito, you would have heard. Lui, lei avrebbe sentito, he or she or it would have heard. Noi avremmo sentito, we would have heard. Voi avreste sentito, y'all would have heard. Loro avrebbero sentito, they would have heard. Okay, now, just like with the passato prossimo, we have to make sure we choose the correct auxiliary verb when using condizionale passato. We do this the same way that we do for the passato prossimo. The book English Grammar for Students of Italian, which I would recommend, by the way, and you can find a link to it on iltavoloitaliano.com, says regarding auxiliary verb selection for the passato prossimo, which is obviously similar to the form of the condizionale passato, that all transitive verbs, verbs which can take a direct object, use the auxiliary avere. All reflexive verbs use the auxiliary essere. Intransitive verbs can use avere or essere. Now, due to the third point, some memory work is required to determine which verbs use essere. You can find a list of common verbs conjugated with essere in the passato prossimo on page 53 of the book Verb Drills by Paola Nani Tate. Also, it's always important to remember that there are always exceptions to the rule, okay? But this will get you through 90% of what you need to do. Okay. It's important to note here when you use a verb in the condizionale passato with the verb essere, the past participle must agree with the subject in gender and number, just like it does in a passato prossimo. For example, the verb andare, or to go. Lui sarebbe andato, he would have gone. O lei sarebbe andata, she would have gone. Gli uomini sarebbero andati, the men would have gone. O le donne sarebbero andate, the women would have gone. As is always the case with gender, when the plural subject is a mix of masculine and feminine, you always default or use the masculine. Now let's look at the verb andare in the condizionale passato, which is, just like before, the conjugated auxiliary verb, which this time will be essere, plus the infinitive verb minus the infinitive ending, which leaves us with the verb stem, and then we add the past participle ending that agrees in gender and number. So, for instance, siamo, which is to be for we, that should be saremo. Correct that real quick. Okay, saremo, for we, conditional, andare minus are, plus ati, past participle ending for masculine plural, leaves us saremmo andati, we would have gone. Once again, I apologize for the mistake. Saremmo andati, we would have gone. Andare conjugated in the condizionale passato. Io sarei andato o andata, I would have gone. Tu saresti andato o andata. You would have gone. Lui lei sarebbe andato o andata. He, she would have gone. Noi saremmo andati o andate. We would have gone. Voi sareste andati o andate. Y'all would have gone. Loro sarebbero andati o andate. They would have gone. Well, thank you very much for joining us at Il Tavolo Italiano to study Italian. I hope this lesson has helped. Remember, you can always find more on this topic and a lot of other topics on the Italian language, grammar, and culture, all at iltavoloitaliano.com. Grazie mille, ciao, buona fortuna, ma ricordi, parla italiano. Ciao.